Representative Frizell.
All right. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Congratulations. You've made it to almost 6:45. Representative Bradley and I are here today to talk with you about House Bill 23-1098, Protecting Female Students' Rights in Athletics. As we begin our conversation today, it's really critical to communicate that this is not an anti-transgender bill. This is a bill about fairness and women being able to compete in sports on a level playing field safely and successfully. This is a significant topic around the United States, so much so that 18 states have passed legislation or enacted rules that protect biologically born women competing in athletics. Because of what's going on around the rest of the country, my co-prime sponsor and I are running this bill to be proactive rather than reactive here in Colorado. We need to have this conversation here in our state because to date, this has been a binary debate at either in or out. And I believe that we can do better in Colorado. Just last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And I, for one, am thrilled with the advances that women have been able to make over time. I'm going to date myself because I'm an old lady. But when I was in grade school and middle school, it was the boys that had opportunities to play sports. We had a few. You could do gymnastics or maybe play club soccer, but that wasn't even that common. But it really wasn't the same as the opportunities that the boys had. In the last 50 years, women have come so far. Today, because of the work of Representative Patsy Mink and others like her, women have equitable access to scholarships and athletic opportunities they never had before. Title IX protects people from discrimination based on sex in education programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. It simply states, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. I worry that in many sports, the physical and physiological advantages of post-puberty trans women give them an unfair advantage over biologically born women. These are young women who have spent years and years of their lives working hard to excel in a sport. And I believe that Title IX ensures that they are able to participate in sports without discrimination on the basis of their gender. We have a small number of expert witnesses to offer their testimony this evening, and I'm just going to reiterate to the folks who are going to be speaking for this bill that we would ask that your testimony be respectful and kind and ensure that we can work through this conversation together.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to Representative Bradley.
Rep. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's been a long day, so I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. I'm going to talk more about statistical evidence. Recent data from the CDC's Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System and Youth Risk Behavior Survey provide an opportunity to update prior population estimates of the number of adults and youth who identify as transgender in the U.S. In 2016 and 2017, the Williams Institute used data from the 2014-15 BRFSS to estimate the number of adults ages 18 and older and youth 13 to 17 who identify as transgender. Over 1.6 million adults ages 18 and older and youth ages 13 to 17 identify as transgender in the United States, or 0.6% of those ages 13 and older. Among U.S. adults, 0.5%, or about 1.3 million adults identify as transgender. Among youth ages 13 to 17 in the U.S., about 300,000 youth identify as transgender. Sex and gender are not the same. Sex is defined by the human genotype and pertains to biological differences between males and females. Gender is a fluid concept molded by self-perception, social constructs, and culturally laden attitudes and expectations of men and women. In general, males have longer limb levers, stronger bones, greater muscle mass and strength, and greater aerobic capacity. Physiologic sex-based differences have led to an average performance gap of 10% that has remained stable since the 1980s. The performance disparity is lowest for swimming and highest for track and field events. The physiological differences between men and women are so great that elite male and female athletes rarely compete with each other. These differences generally give men a more competitive edge in sports that reward absolute strength, acceleration, and speed. I'm going to let our expert witnesses testify to the differences in cardiovascular fitness, strength, endurance, bone structure, and other physiological differences. After the testimony, you will find that the physiological differences between men and women are so great that elite male and female athletes rarely compete. These differences generally give men a competitive edge in sports that reward absolute strength, acceleration, and speed. If you know sport, you know that this is beyond a reasonable doubt. There's an average 10 to 12% performance gap between elite males and elite females. This gap is smaller between elite females and non-elite males, but it's still insurmountable, and that's ultimately what matters. Translating these statistics into real-world results, we see, for example, that just in the single year 2017, Olympic, world, and U.S. champion Tori Bowie's 100 meters lifetime best of 10.78 was beaten 15,000 times by men. The same is true of Olympic, world, and U.S. champion Allison Felix's 400 meters lifetime best of 49.26. Just in the single year 2017, men and boys around the world outperformed her more, again, than 15,000 times. This differential isn't the result of boys and men having a male identity, more resources, better training, or superior discipline. It's because they have an androgenized body. The results make clear that sex determines win share. Female athletes have defined as athletes with ovaries instead of testes and testosterone. Levels capable of being produced by the female non-androgenized body are not competitive for the win against males. Here defined as athletes with testes and T levels in the male range. The lowest end of the male range is 3 times higher than the highest end of the female range. Consistent with females' far lower T levels, the female range is also very narrow, with the male range being very broad. These biological differences explain the male and female secondary sex characteristics which develop during puberty and have lifelong effects, including those most important for success in sport. Categorically different strength, speed, and endurance. There is no other physical, cultural, or socioeconomic trait as important as testes for sports purposes. The number of men and boys beating the world's best women in the 100 and 400 meters is far from the exception. It is the rule. To demonstrate this article compared the top women's results to the boys and men's results across multiple standard track and field events just for the single year of 2017. Our data are drawn from the International Association of Athletics Federations website, which provides complete worldwide results for individuals and events, including on an annual and all-time basis. We have limited the analysis to those events where direct performance comparison could be made, and that's the handout that I asked them to pass out to you. The first table compares the number of boys, males under the age of 18, whose results in each event in 2017 would rank them above the single very best elite senior woman that year. In elite sports, senior simply means adult. The best senior athletes are the world's best athletes. So according to this chart, this data shows an unfair advantage of biological males competing against biological females. I'm also handing out the study by the British Journal of Sports Medicine. In this study, they confirmed that use of gender-affirming hormones are associated with changes in athletic performance and demonstrated that the pre-treatment differences between transgender and cisgender women persist beyond the 12-month requirement currently being proposed for athletic competition by the World Athletics and the International Olympic Committee. The study suggests that 12 months of testosterone suppression may be needed to ensure that transgender women do not have an unfair competitive advantage when participating in elite level athletic competition. With nearly 1 in 5 people who identify as transgender ages 13 to 17, along with CHASA adding bylaws to allow biological males to play in the sports they weren't assigned by birth to play in, with the physiological differences between male and female athletes, it is time to address this. FINA, the International Federation for Swimming and Water Sports, have stringent rules for trans girls and women for competing in the women's category unless they have transitioned before age 12 and maintain their testosterone levels. The International Rugby League and the International League of Cycling Union also has revealed strict rules for trans feminine athletes. Notably, no international federation has released a policy that explicitly includes trans athletes. The NCAA has now deferred its ruling on trans females to the national governing bodies for each sport. NWSL, Athletes Unlimited, and USA Swimming all have stringent guidelines to allow trans women to compete. This is a case of discriminating against biologically born women in the name of equity. Female sports for biologically born women need to be a protected category to ensure fairness in competition. Biologic women deserve to compete on a level playing field. Allowing trans females, biological males, to compete in women's athletic opportunities discriminates against this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the bill sponsors from members of the committee? Rep. Bottoms.
So my question, I think, is more, and I'll put it to Representative Bradley. My question is more ideological. You've given a lot of statistics, and I don't think any sane person would disagree that biological males are going to outpace biological females in sports. So this isn't at the core of this is not the biological issue. Leah Thomas, I think that's his name, he was middle of the pack in most NCAA stuff. He jumps into women's swimming and he exceeds every woman immediately, okay? So this is not biological discussion. This is more ideological. So my question is, looking at how all of the women fought for years and years and years, even to be able to have sports like high school sports and stuff like that. My grandmother would tell me about this. She fought so that they could have high school sports because they couldn't play with the boys because the boys weren't playing at the same level. They couldn't play at the same level. And then different feminist groups over the years that have fought so hard for women to have the equality in the Olympics, in school sports, and everything. How do you think this is affecting in ideologically, emotionally, everything? How do you think this is affecting women, girls in sports and in general?
Rep. Bradley.
Thank you for the question. I think it's affecting them widespread. We see news reports in the news. Riley Gaines testified that she lost multiple competitions when paired against Leah. We see several stories that I'm going to allude to in my conclusion that talks about women who have lost scholarships, who have lost races, who have lost opportunities after sports all across the board. So I think it's affecting their mental capacity. I think it's affecting their sports capabilities. I think it's across the board. And that's why we are presenting this bill to make it fair to protect women in sports.
Any further questions from the committee? Rep. DeGraff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be for Ms. Bradley again. Just more of an observation. Just note the conflation of the terms as you started off, male and female in terms of the biological sex, which is a sex definition, and then you have men and women, and then going to the gender, but then referring to trans females, trans males, and then instead of the other. So I just see that as part of the conflation. And if you haven't, it's interesting to look up the term gender and where it came from. And they started using gender because people were referring to sex instead of the terms of procreation.
Is there a question, Rep. DeGraff?
I guess I would have to wonder why you were conflating those terms with between sex and gender.
Okay, I don't recall it. Rep. Bradley?
That was not my intent. I don't recall doing it. It's late. So for me, it's talking about biological males competing in female sports. So my apologies if I was confusing.
I just had to turn it into a question.
Rep. Bottoms.
Do you have any idea, and I can direct this toward Representative Frizell, do you have any idea how many females, girls, or adults, girls, are losing out on financial aid, maybe scholarships, any of that kind of stuff, because a boy jumped into that sport and took out some of those leaders that would have naturally been scholarshiped to college, but now they didn't win that state. They didn't win that next competition because there was a boy in the girl competition. Do you have any idea of numbers on some of that stuff?
Representative Frizell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Bottoms, we do have testimony coming up around this, so I would defer to our expert witnesses.
Okay, any further comments from the committee? Seeing none, let's move on to